BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And just a quick reminder, every Monday is Zodiac Mondays. Wednesday is an Ask Me Anything. That's an AMA, so please drop your questions below for things that you would like discussed here on the show. And Friday is an Anything Goes. Any subject is fair game, mostly talking about true crime, serial killers, the Zodiac Killer, but any subject is welcome. All right, so please share some ideas in the comment section about what you would like to hear about on this channel, and let's get started. Okay, hello everybody. Today is Wednesday, time for the AMA. That's the Ask Me Anything. And we have a lot of questions and comments to go through about the Zodiac Killer, true crime, other serial killers, but we often begin these things with a borrowed question, if you will. And this one comes to us from Joe Rogan. I was listening to his stand-up, actually, not the podcast, but his stand-up act, and he was telling the story about how he once asked somebody the question, would you trade one of your fingers if you could meet Bigfoot in real life? If you could meet a Sasquatch in real life, would you get one of your fingers cut off? Would you give up one of your fingers? Would you have it amputated? And I really wanted to put some thought into that. Would I do that? Would I give up one of my fingers if I could meet a Sasquatch in real life? And I'm so tempted to say no because I grew up reading R.L. Stine and Goosebumps, Be Careful What You Wish For, and the whole possibility of, let's say, for example, we have to add in the condition that this is actually Bigfoot, this is actually like a real Sasquatch, there's no prank, there's no hoax, there's no deception, you're gonna meet the real thing. But what happens if you meet Sasquatch and this Sasquatch tears you to pieces instantly? Alright, you get to be in the same room with it for a second, and then it kills you. Or what if it's even something about you'll just see it for like a tenth of a second, and then, okay, yep, that's it, those are the rules. I mean, like, there could be so much deception that is going on with this in a different direction, like those two examples that I just provided. But even though I am tempted to say no, I still have to say yes. I still have to say yes. I would give up one of my fingers if I could actually encounter a real life Bigfoot or Sasquatch, because human beings just have this enormous desire for knowing. Like, we want to know the truth, as well as, I mean, I'm going to tell everything about my encounter with Bigfoot and Sasquatch, and I'm just going to project it out to the world. And just having that type of knowledge would be very valuable, not only to myself, but to other people. And I mean, this is all an if, right? I'm not even some diehard Bigfoot researcher. There are 2 episodes about Bigfoot here on this channel, Black Box Online Radio. One was a little bit more conventional, going through the stories of Greg Long, and like encountering individuals like Bob Hieronymus and Philip Morris, who were allegedly involved with the filming of the Patterson-Gimlin film that was put forward by Roger Patterson and witnessed by Bob Gimlin. That was talking more about the making of Bigfoot, is the nutshell version of that, and going through that material. And the other one was called What is the Skunk Ape?, looking at the Bigfoot stories of Florida. But I'm really not a diehard Bigfoot researcher. Instead, I would just want to, have that experience. And if this were the case about if you had the chance to be on some type of alien flying saucer, would you give up one of your fingers to do that? I would be saying yes to that as well, because once again, the human desire for knowing, I mean, to get to ride on some type of like alien flying saucer, I think that would be way more valuable than meeting Bigfoot, because Bigfoot's here on the Earth. I mean, Bigfoot is supposedly just this elusive terrestrial species that just is really good at hiding in the forest. But I mean, if you get a chance to like go into outer space or something, and you're like gonna be going by the rings of Saturn and such on a flying saucer, wait a second, aliens are known for some really nasty stuff, actually. Don't they like to do experiments on your butt or something like that? Okay, I take that one back, but still, Bigfoot. I would give up one of my fingers to meet Bigfoot, maybe not the aliens, but the other rule is, the thumb is not a finger, right? I wouldn't give up one of my opposable thumbs to meet Bigfoot, just because, just being a little bit of a jerk. But on to our next borrowed question. I said we had two of them. There's this channel called Insight SBS on YouTube, and it's an Australian talk show, but all of their episodes are titled with questions. And their question is, what goes on in the mind of a stalker? And I think it's a really good way of arranging a talk show. Every episode is a question. What goes on in the mind of a stalker? And I have to confess to you, I have never stalked anyone. I've never been the victim of stalking. So this is a total outsider attempt to answer the question. And it's more or less going through that episode and perhaps one or two other things on YouTube and trying to answer the question, what goes on in the mind of a stalker? And from their literature and material and media, I can give you 3 different reasons why somebody would become a stalker. The first one is, in some cases, there is genuine mental illness, meaning that the person isn't coming from a place of human empathy or logic. They're dealing with some very intense mental illness. The second one is rejection. This person is just unable to accept rejection, and they have this desire to be with someone, but they are doing these stalker style behaviors because they believe that well, they just do not want to hear no for an answer, because then they would have to face the reality of being rejected by a person. And the third one could be entitlement. And with entitlement, that means that they feel that this type of behavior is entitled to them, or that they have the right to behave in this way, and then the other person is the one who is in the wrong, that their actions are justified because they want them. And points 2 and 3 on that list share a very particular commonality, and that is that they're fueled by fantasy. And I learned a lot about this stuff from the YouTuber Sierra Pine, who would talk about how if you cannot differentiate between fantasy and reality, you're dangerous. And that is like a very famous line that she would share in her episodes, talking about how, like, say, for example, some guy sees a beautiful woman and he wants her to be his girlfriend, but she doesn't want to be in a relationship with him. But when he doesn't accept no for an answer, that could even be an issue of not being able to differentiate between fantasy and reality. He has this desire to be with her. He has this fantasy of being with her, but that's not in fantasy world if he's trying to make it happen in real life. And he is just totally blending together these elements, like his fantasy-filled desires and the actual actions that he is doing here in the real world, and it becomes impossible for him to differentiate between the two, and that gets really close to the level of mental illness. Although when I said mental illness at the beginning, I meant things would be a little bit more intense than just that particular state of being, maybe more something along the lines of schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder, or perhaps other psychotic features. But in regards to the inability to differentiate between fantasy and reality, how does this come about? What goes on in the mind of the stalker? Well, a different source was providing the explanation that it's about control. That, I mean, entitlement, yes, and they don't want to be rejected, yes, but why? The desire for control of this person becomes overwhelming, and they feel like they're doing a good thing. I mean, in many instances. In other instances, some people would feel like they're doing a malicious thing, but the commonality is they want to control this person, and that is another example of trying to act out a very destructive fantasy where they have this expectation that they want to control this person, and they can't accept that the person is just not submitting to their control, so they do the things that a stalker would do. Now, when it comes to the term cyber stalking, I thought I knew what this was, but I've talked before on the show that I'm a fan of the podcast The First Degree, which I get from podcast1.com. And they gave him an explanation about cyber stalking, that if someone is just sending somebody like repetitive messages or annoying comments, that is harassment. Cyber stalking is when somebody is trying to interfere with somebody's life offline. Someone is trying to interfere with somebody's life, like not connected to the internet. Maybe they are having strange packages mailed to their home. Maybe they're sending cards to this person's workplace and they're using, the internet to monitor a person or obtain their address and then sending that to people. in a hard copy form, doing things of that nature. So cyberstalking adds an additional element. I've also never been the victim of that, or I've never done that to anyone. So, and I'm an outsider when it comes to that one. I've told the story before on the show about how in 2020 I had a breakup with an ex-girlfriend, and she she started just messaging nonstop, so I blocked her off of all media, all social media, all contacts, blocked her phone numbers, all her profiles. So she's just kept making new ones. She just kept making new profiles and continued the behavior. And then when I kept blocking those, she would borrow her friend's phone to start harassing me, and then even just getting her friends to do the messaging and the calls themselves on her behalf. But that would still go into the category of harassment. I mean, she wasn't mailing anything to my home, or she wasn't interfering with my life off of the internet. That was still just an example of harassment. I did know an instance of someone when he was actually caught up with stalking a woman. And this is like a very benign thing in retrospect. At the time, I mean, it was kind of free. We were all kind of disturbed by it. But one of my friends from high school graduated, and he was a freshman in college, but the girl that he was trying to date was still in high school. She was a senior at the time. So they went to the senior homecoming dance. I mean, I guess it's just a high school homecoming dance, even though had already graduated, and they just did that together, and all they did was share a kiss. But he thought that she really liked him. He became infatuated, so he kept calling her repetitively and kept leaving messages repetitively, to the point where he said that he received a message from that girl's mother saying, "If you contact my daughter again, I'm going to the police." And then he's telling me, "I just want to try one more time to get in touch with her." And that's when I'm like, dude, you have to stop. She is not interested in you. I mean, when she's having her mother tell you that, "Please call the police on this guy," that means that she doesn't want to be with you. No, no, I just want to try one more time and to get in touch with her. And it's the whole idea that, from my interpretation of the events at the time, he was like, he's just thinking, oh, she's just really confused, but if I get the chance to talk to her, I can smooth the waters. I can correct the situation. And I think in that example, it's those points 1, 2, and 3 completely in a nutshell, where you have someone who feels very entitled that he deserves to be with her because he thinks he's doing nothing wrong. He thinks she's going to like him if she just spends more time with him and gives him more chances. And it's also about how he is refusing to accept rejection. I mean, very clearly. But why is he doing that? Because number one, he wants to have control over her. Number two, he has this fantasy of being with her where it's completely blended together with reality. And that would be a person who could not differentiate between fantasy and reality. I mean, I'm sure you've known somebody who told very wild stories, and maybe in your youth, like in elementary school, junior high, and even high school, someone's like, "Oh yeah, on my weekend I did this thing, and I went rock climbing on this really tall mountain, and I jumped off, and I almost died, but then I landed on some pine trees or something like that, so I don't have any scratches." Like someone who would just tell really, really ridiculous stories. I can think of 3 people immediately that come to mind, and who would always do that, like not just once or twice, but all the time. They would just make up these really silly stories about what they're doing that no one can see them doing. However, when they were presented with contradictory evidence, then they would admit that, okay, yeah, I just made it up. I mean, okay, yeah, you caught me. That didn't actually happen. When they were actually like backed up in the corner and people knew that they weren't telling the truth, then they would admit it. And that those people are very problematic in their own right. They're not good people to be friends with, and they're definitely not very empathetic and supportive. But at the same time, they're not really falling into that classification of the inability to differentiate between fantasy and reality. Oh, they know what's fantasy and they know what reality is. They're just being very annoying in their lifestyle. But in regards to the way that some people function, it's that, and this stalker guy would definitely fall into this category that we're going now, is some people have this fantasy that their expectations and their knowledge pool is all that exists. I hope that you will have heard this, and if you remember anything from this episode, I hope that it will be this little segment right here. The fantasy that their expectation and their knowledge pool is all that exists. Because, yeah, of course, they can learn new things, they can acquire new knowledge, but because we said expectation and knowledge pool, they think only their ability to learn is all there is. So when someone provides them something that is contradictory, or someone challenges maybe something they believe, or they want to dispute a fact with them, they get very defensive, very emotional. They just start screaming, "No, you're wrong," and then they just turn into turn into some type of very emotional being, going on a very emotional tirade, simply because they can't accept the fact that something existed outside of their knowledge pool that they weren't able to acquire. Like, and when you see this one from time to time, I think that's more about what that statement was, that if you can't differentiate between fantasy and reality, you're dangerous. I mean, once we get to the Zodiac killer, you'll see that that's an extremely dangerous example. But in terms of day-to-day life, about someone who just thinks that their knowledge pool and their expectations is all that exists, that person is really not suitable to be around. I mean, they're going to make terrible friends, they're going to make terrible partners in relationships, they're going to make terrible coworkers, because they're just going to get so defensive anytime something that they don't want happens. They're just going to explode over all that. And maybe you can even think of a couple people whom you've known in your life. But in terms of answering that question, what goes on in the mind of a stalker? I mean, some people are extremely mentally ill, as we said, maybe schizophrenics or people who have similar disorders like that, who are doing behaviors and aren't really in a good state of mind. And then there are other people who are not able to accept rejection because their expectations, their knowledge pool is all it is. They just can't comprehend how somebody is thinking in a way in which they haven't anticipated, or that a way that isn't beneficial to them. And then there's the entitled behavior. That's the third point, where this person is so convinced that they deserve these they deserve this fantasy to be fulfilled. Like, they deserve their expectations to be met. And even on that show that provided us with the title, one guy isn't convinced that he's doing something wrong. Like, in that instance, he was served an order of protection because he kept writing repetitive letters to somebody who didn't agree with him about something. And he was like, all I'm doing is expressing myself. All I'm doing is giving my side of the story. Well, then that crossed into the line of harassment. Then that crossed into the line of stalking. And that is someone who is also perhaps somewhat narcissistic. And I'm sure that narcissism fits into all of these different dimensions. But thank you for listening to this first segment here about the mind of a stalker, and I would really like to hear your responses more to the Bigfoot question. Would you give up one of your fingers to meet Bigfoot, or you'd even add in the thing about aliens? Would you give up one of your fingers to spend some time on a flying saucer with aliens? What would be your answers to that? Think of that as an icebreaker. But if anybody has any challenge questions that they would like to share about maybe experiences with a stalker, from any direction, like, have you ever had a stalker? Have you ever had an experience with somebody who was doing things like online harassment? Please feel free to drop your responses in the comments section below, and we will be right back after this quick message. Bum ba bum 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 ba bum 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 ba bum bum bum. At this time, I would like to talk about some of the ways in which you can help Black Box Online Radio. This channel relies on your support, and the best way you can help out is just by listening to some more content. If you like what you hear, you can hit that like button, subscribe, and share with your friends on social media. But I should also say that Black Box Online Radio now has a Teespring page, and there will be some links in the description box. Please feel free to check out some of the merchandise that is available. Almost all sizes and colors are listed. So, you can also help out by going over to the Zodiac Killer channel and watching the documentary series Obsession into Darkness, parts 1, 2, and 3. I was one of the contributors for that, and you can see some other great Zodiac content on the Zodiac Killer channel. And yes, there will be a part 4 of Obsession into Darkness at some point in the future. And for now, let's get back to the show. Okay, hello everybody, and we are back. Moving on with the AMA, I actually remembered that there is one more borrowed question that I would like to get to, and this is actually one that I would turn over to you guys because I was on YouTube Movies and I was watching the documentary Evocateur, which is about Morton Downey Jr., the TV talk show host. He was the guy who would say, "Zip it, pal." His nickname was Mouth. And they said that he was the first rock star who didn't play music. Of course, Morton Downey Jr. started out as a musician, the son of a musician, but because he did the talk show, they said that the Morton Downey Jr. show was, well, just that, the rock star effect without the music. So I would like to ask you guys this as a question. Who do you think was the first rock star who didn't play music? And this is one where of course I would like to take a stab at it. And the first person I thought of was Charles Manson. And I know you might be like, well, Charles Manson was all about music. He was a musician, of course. And I was like, yeah, but he was definitely more famous for no, things that were not music. He's definitely more famous for being a criminal, for the murders, for just his crazy prison interviews. If you want to say that that is a type of acceptable answer. And then the next person that I thought of was perhaps Howard Stern. The only problem is that Howard Stern was so much of a dork for much of his career, and then he just turned into that whole king of all media presence, which is a self-appointed title that he gave to himself. And I don't really hope that didn't come across as mean or nasty. I actually, well, I listen to Howard Stern all the time, much like many people do, but definitely went from just kind of that dorky persona to this overinflated self-image, and it happened over a period of many years. I don't even know if you would call him a rock star who didn't play music. Definitely more of a major media personality, and you might even think about some people like Instagram models. Maybe they're rock stars who don't play music, or people who make TikTok videos that aren't really very musical. But I would like to ask the question to you rather. You heard my two possible answers. Who do you think was the first rock star who didn't play music? And I just didn't find that Morton Downey Jr. was a very satisfying answer. Moving on to the AMA, getting to our first comment that comes to us from Alexis Deverick, who has one to say about the death of Daniel Huffman. Last year in 2020, I did an episode called Gift of Love, The Death of Daniel Huffman, which was perhaps one of the most fascinating stories that I discovered that year. It's called Gift of Love because they made a movie about him of that name that stars Debbie Reynolds and Eldon Heston. You might remember him as playing Fulton Reed in the Mighty Ducks movies, and he's in that. It's the story of a guy who gives up his dreams of playing college football so he can donate his kidney to his grandmother. And he's like this high school prospect. He has a very long football career ahead of him. He might have even have gone into the National Football League if he stuck at it, but he decided to donate his kidney to his grandmother, so because she needed a transplant. And then Daniel Huffman went on to commit suicide at the age of 25. But the things that people are suspicious about is he showed no signs of suicidal behavior. There was no suicide note that was left behind. And in that episode, Gift of Love, The Death of Daniel Huffman, I only briefly mentioned this. I just read somebody else's blog, like a little snippet that somebody had written out just saying, hey, doesn't this seem suspicious? It's almost like this should be investigated as a murder. And Alexis Deverick would like to weigh in on this because she says, I'm his first cousin. She is Daniel Huffman's first cousin, that is. His mom is my. His dad is my mom's brother. Excuse me, that was a difficult sentence for me to say for some reason. His dad is my mom's brother. He didn't die from suicide. There were plenty of pieces of evidence pointing to murder, but the county investigators didn't want to do the paperwork. They admitted that they were too lazy to do the paperwork. No joke. That's exactly what they said. If you want to know the full story, my email is, and she has put it there, and I've just contacted her using BlackBoxOnlineRadio at AOL.com. Daniel told my father the day before he died that he was going to break up with his girlfriend at the time. His gun and phone was left at his girlfriend's the morning he died. Then his gun and phone were found on him when he was dead. Email me if you want the story and why the family still claims that Daniel was murdered 16 years after his death. And I did just that, and perhaps we can do a follow-up in the future on the death of Daniel Huffman. I mean, when I was reading that stuff, and it's been a while, but it appeared that the county officials were all saying there are no signs of murder, there's no sign of a homicide, this was a suicide by gunshot wound. Everybody around Daniel Huffman was simply baffled by this, and his grandmother, who received the kidney from him, simply said, "I now have a kidney, but I don't have my grandson." And there are a few very select quotations that they use from the family. He just didn't save enough light for himself. Someone who's just being very generous and being very thoughtful and caring. But yeah, it definitely was a shocking and unexpected story. The only thing that I would say in terms of counterbalance is some of the material that was in that episode, Gift of Love, The Death of Daniel Huffman, that we don't necessarily know what people are dealing with. We don't necessarily know how other people's impulses are going to function. Other people, like, it's a mystery of life, right? Like, there's this thing in Hinduism where they say there are three major mysteries, like a bird to air, a fish to water, and mankind to himself. And maybe if you want to go a little bit more contemporary, you could think about the band Butthole Surfers who did the song Pepper, and they said you never know just how you look through other people's eyes, meaning that you don't know what other people are thinking, and that people could be suicidal and simply show absolutely no signs of it. Like, you'll have no idea that they are going to do something like that. Or perhaps Alexis, who is a first-hand connection to this story, saying that the county officials did not want to investigate this as a homicide because of the paperwork. That stuff happens as well. I remember the story of Tom Sublet that I learned about on the Lord and Arts channel, and Tom Sublet was a guy who was found shot. He died from a gunshot wound to the head, but both of his hands were tied up behind his back, and the gun was found at the bottom of a lake. So then it was like, but it was still ruled as a suicide, and then it was very similar to what Alexis has written out in this comment. It appeared, and I repeat, appeared. I certainly can't prove anything. I mean, just watching someone else's YouTube video and learning about the story and reading up on it a little bit more. But this individual, Tom Sublet, died from a homicide, but they ruled it as a suicide. And if you would like to learn more about that, once again, the channel is Lord and Arts, hosted by John Lorden. He is very up and coming now. He's also working with Netflix. So that is just something to say about the death of Daniel Huffman, as well as Tom Sublet. Perhaps we can look at both of those cases more in the future, but I definitely hope to hear back from Alexis very soon to obtain this information. And moving on to some questions about the Zodiac killer. On Monday, for the Zodiac Monday segment, I did one on the Domingos Edwards murders, the murders of Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards in 1963. So we have loads of comments that have come in about this, and one of the future episodes that might happen on the channel is that there could be something about the murder of Vernon Smith, who may have been killed by the Zodiac killer, because one of the suspects in the Domingos Edwards case is named Sandy, the infamous elusive Sandy, whom we aren't really sure who the guy is, but it's possible that he was involved in a murder very recently. Previously, like before the Domingos Edwards murder. It's possible that an individual named Vernon Smith was murdered, and it's the same guy that committed these three murders, and maybe went on to be the Zodiac killer. And NPC Porky would like to say something about this. I was reading an article on ZodiacCiphers.com about this murder, and it states that the car that Sandy and the two other kids had stolen was later found by the police, and inside there were pieces of paper and clothing which contained the names Robert Kaufman and William Carr, from which they came to the conclusion that they were clothes owned by Sandy. I do really think that this was a crime committed by a younger and less professional Zodiac, due to the similarities with Lake Berryessa. It could be Sandy or someone else. More than I do believe it was the Zodiac that killed Bates. From what I saw in the mentioned documentary, that was the one that was done by Jim Everett, and that's available actually on Tom Voigt's channel. Gaviota Beach looks like to be a secluded area next to the US 101 highway, which covers most of the Californian coast. So it's possible that the killer, not being from the area or even being familiar with it, was just using this road and may have seen the victim's car parked in this area and decided to park next to it only to observe the victims from a distance, plan what he was about to do, and then attacked, just like the suspicious man that saw some girls at Lake Berryessa. I requested this in the past from you to make a video about this. Thank you so much. I hope it would not be considered too much of an annoyance if I requested you to do the same type of video about the murder of Ray Davis, the Swindles in 1964, and there are some other suggestions on here, but absolutely I want to do something on the Swindle murders, and because we've been going back to the early 1960s, and even the Swindle murders, this isn't 1964, but once I started looking at the Domingos Edwards case, as I said, the first one that I thought about was doing one on the murder of Vernon Smith, who was possibly murdered in the days prior to the Domingos Edwards incident at Gaviota. But yes, you have to then go to the murder of Ray Davis in 1962, the cab driver who was murdered in Oceanside, California. And then it really, because I think that it could all be relevant. And I do appreciate that those suggestions, NPC Porky. I just have one thing to say about the murder of Ray Davis, and maybe I'll do an entire episode on them, like, 45, 50 minutes, just talking about this incident, where we can expand upon this. But Ray Davis was a taxi driver, right? And he was murdered in 1962. Then you have Paul Stein, who was a taxi driver, who was murdered in 1969. The final confirmed Zodiac incident. Now, is it possible that the murder of Ray Davis and the murder of Paul Stein are both genuine cases of Zodiac activity, and that it's meant to come full circle? Because what's the event prior to the Paul Stein murder? Lake Berryessa. And look what NPC Porky has written here. The Domingos Edwards case has an enormous amount of similarities to Lake Berryessa. Think of what was said, coming full circle. And it has to go in a full 360-degree turn. So then the Swindle murders in 1964, that could be something that is reminiscent of the Blue Rock Springs shooting, although, to be honest, it sounds like it's quite different. It sounds like the Johnny Ray and Joyce Swindle were shot from a distance. But with something really stood out to me about that, where you have the two people who are attacked on the beach in Gaviota, and then you have the two people who are attacked at the lakeside at Lake Berryessa, where the killer brought pre-cut lengths of rope, brought both a gun and a knife, and most likely tried to tie up the victims and do something to them. I mean, it really just feels like something is coming in a 360-degree circle where this perpetrator is committing these types of murders. Maybe it's all mathematically designed, or maybe it's done in a more personal way about saying, I want to attribute these crimes to a meaning of personal significance. But I definitely would like to look more into the murder of Ray Davis on this channel in the future. But there is a very good point in this comment here about that NPC Porky mentioned, because in the episode on the Domingos Edwards case, I was like, this was a senior skip day, June 4th, 1963, when Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards were murdered. So I was saying that they were the only people on the beach. Then the perpetrator most likely knew about the senior skip day, and that's why the perpetrator found them alone on the beach. So I was like thinking, maybe this is a classmate, maybe this is an employee of the school. But if you look at this segment in the comment, from what I saw in the documentary, Gaviota Beach looks like it's a secluded area next to the US 101 highway, which covers most of the California coast. So it is possible that the killer, not even being from the area, was just using the road and saw the victim's car parked. So I mean, that could change the equation entirely, that somebody's driving down, they see this car parked by the beach, and then they were just expecting that there would be someone in a vulnerable place. That could be just some type of mentally unstable individual who wanted to murder individuals, and the victims were not predetermined at all. Or another possibility that was brought up in the episode that we mentioned, very close to the end, about how Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards were murdered and their bodies fell into a creek bed, like when they were shot dead. Then the perpetrator dragged them to a small shack that was at the beach, which no longer exists. But the murderer tried to set fire to the shack, or at the very least struck some matches and tried to set fire to this tarp that's hanging on the door. But one of the possibilities is maybe there was someone living in the shack at the time, because the person who built the shack and lived in it for a while was one of the suspects, but that his alibi was confirmed. And I think he was the one who was in San Jose at the time of the crime, so he didn't commit the murder. But then, well, someone else could have been living in the shack and then simply spotted two people in a vulnerable place from a distance and approached them. The 22 caliber Super X ammunition that was found at Gaviota, and this isn't actually Gaviota State Park, mind you, this is just very close by to Gaviota State Park off of this Route 101. So that was found inside the shack. The Super X ammunition was found inside the shack. I think there were 4 boxes that were in there, and most people think, okay, the perpetrator brought it with him, but then you could I don't see any other reason to doubt that the perpetrator may have stashed it there, or maybe someone was living in the shack temporarily, and then somebody who's even on the run, and they just encountered Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards at that beach. And I mean, I definitely do not know 100%. It is an unsolved crime, but I think that is there's a lot of material in that comment there, so much appreciated. And then going on in the AMA, our next comment comes to us from the cat Meow. And the cat says, "Hi, remember me? Yeah, of course I remember you. You used to be just called the cat, but now you're the cat Meow. I'm the one who left the message about Darlene and the Merchant Marine. People will believe what they want, but when it comes to the Zodiac Killer, to each their own, I guess. I just turned 56 this February, and I lived my entire life not knowing who I was. My entire life would do a 360 just about 4 years ago. I mean, not to just tie back into some previous material from the Domingos Edwards case, but think about that, 360 degrees in a circle, right? I mean, is this just meant to represent some pattern in life? Like, say, for example, the cycle of the zodiac and the star signs and the animals and the Chinese zodiac or something? And I shouldn't even have said Chinese zodiac because I'm rambling, but I mean, could there actually be somewhat of a pattern with the taxi driver, then the couple by the waterside and or waterfront, excuse me? But let's go back to the Cat Meow's comment, and that says, I started putting all the pieces of the puzzle together. The Zodiac Killer, believe it or not, goes hand in hand with the Escape from Alcatraz from 1962, where John and Clarence Anglin and Frank Lee Morris escaped Alcatraz prison. Why do I say this? Because the same person did them both. There's a couple of more cold cases that go along with these cold cases, but I won't jump into those. Not now, anyway. The Merchant Marine theory is true. This Merchant Marine seaman was a master in his field. He was a captain. He was very smart. He was not only protected by our government, but he was also a CIA assassin. He and Alan Dulles were best friends. Alan Dulles, being the head of the MK Ultra CIA experiments, took place here in the United States. Their first mission together was Project Paperclip. And the comment goes on a bit, but when I first read this, I thought that the Cat Meow was saying Frank Lee Morris was the Zodiac Killer, and we have an episode about him on this channel called Zodiac Killer David Gold Theory. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers are the subject of the book My Dance with the Zodiac Killer, where David Kuchar, also known as David Gold, that was his name when he was a professional wrestler, he claims that he knew Frank Morris personally and that this individual told him that he escaped from Alcatraz. It's not only that he was the Zodiac Killer, because this is a variant of the group murder theory. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers committed the Zodiac murders. Frank Morris was also the Phantom Killer from Texarkana in 1946, the Texarkana Moonlight Murders, as well as D.B. Cooper, I kid thee not, all of these events, the Escape from Alcatraz, the Moonlight Murders, the Zodiac Killer, and D.B. Cooper are all orchestrated by the same group of individuals. And but the way this comment is structured, and the Cat Meow, if you're listening to this, let me know if I've got your theory right. Are you saying that there is not just these 3 people, Frank Morris and the 2 Anglin brothers, but there is a 4th individual that is with them that has gone overlooked, or that is not on our radar? If so, please feel free to correct me, because I don't see how it would be possible that Frank Morris was all of those guys, the Phantom Killer, part of the Zodiac Killer mystery anyway, as well as D.B. Cooper. Now, the Merchant Marine theory, that's something that exists mostly on its own, independent from Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, because the Merchant Marine theory is heavily connected to an individual named Robert Tarbox. He received the famous Tarbox confession, where somebody walked into his law office, Tarbox being an attorney, and simply said that he was the Zodiac Killer and he wanted Tarbox to represent him as an attorney. He paid the fee, which I think was $50, but I'm only going off of memory on that, and that Tarbox thought it was very credible. But this guy also did say that he was a merchant marine. And the Merchant Marine theory, which the Cat Meow has shared with me many times, is that Darlene Ferrin was having an affair with a 50-year-old merchant marine, and he was supporting her financially. And when he came back on shore, first in December of 1968, he tried to kill Darlene Ferrin, but he mistook her from a distance, and he thought that Darlene Ferrin was riding in a car with David Faraday, but it was actually Betty Lou Jensen. And I have said very clearly that in terms of physical similarities, Darlene Ferrin and Betty Lou Jensen have the most striking similarities. I mean, physically, Cecilia Shepard looks very different. Sherry Jo Bates even looks very different, more or less, but definitely Cecilia compared to the other two victims, Betty Lou Jensen and Darlene Ferrin. And then this individual went on to murder Darlene Ferrin on the 4th of July, and that the Cat Meow, if I recall, believes that there's a dispute between the Cat Meow and Thomas Henry Horn, who says that there was no argument that took place in the parking lot of Terry's restaurant where Darlene Ferrin worked on the night that she died. The Cat Meow says, yes, indeed, that argument did happen. It happened at 10:30 p.m. This merchant marine shows up and he has an argument with Darlene Ferrin. Then she gets in the car with Mike Mageau and drives to Blue Rock Springs Park. He follows along, and then he murders her, and then would go on to murder Cecilia Shepard and Paul Stine. But I just putting that theory out on the table. I really do not find David Gold's Frank Morris theory to be credible at all. We do have an episode on it. I said epilogue because episode upload. Sometimes you say two words at the same time. I do this very frequently. But now, in regards to our next comment, it comes to us from none other than the Zodiac Killer himself. Zodiac says, how many people do you think the Zodiac actually killed? And I love that the next comment below says, you are him, you should know. And then the Zodiac Z has replied, that's not him. Which Zodiac do we want to trust? No, but Zodiac, to answer your question, I don't believe I'm actually doing this. How many people did you kill? No, how many people did the Zodiac Killer actually murder? Well, AMA, it's very nice to have just a very solid, heart of the matter question like that. And I'm going to answer this in the absolute most annoying way possible. And let's look at some different theories. Number one, if you entertain the Zodiac hoax theory, then I would say the Zodiac Killer murdered one person. In the most pure form of the Zodiac hoax theory, then the person who is wearing the costume at Lake Berryessa that has that circle with the cross going through it murdered Cecilia Shepard. Brian Hartnell would go on to survive the stabbing. One. Because, I mean, that is a murder that was committed under the sign of the Zodiac Killer. And the Zodiac hoax theory is, of course, that one individual named Hal Snook was writing letters taking credit for murders that he did not commit. David Faraday, Betty Lou Jensen, Darlene Ferrin, and Paul Stine were perhaps not murdered by Hal Snook. There's another variant of the hoax theory that, okay, somebody committed the Lake Berryessa stabbing, but then Hal Snook went on and murdered Paul Stine on October 11th of 1969. And the way I explain that is, this started out as a hoax. Somebody was just taking credit for murders that he didn't commit. But then, by the summer of 1969, it took on a life of its own, and Cecilia Shepard was murdered, and Paul Stine was murdered, and for the reasons that I don't think anyone is completely aware of. But that's an if. That is a possibility. If you are going down the pathway of the multiple killers theory, then once again, what's the answer? One. That every single one of these murders was committed by the same person. Actually, though, Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday would have been murdered by the same person. This is sometimes called the Four Horsemen theory, like Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, that one person committed the Lake Herman Road shooting, one person committed the Blue Rock Springs shooting, one person did the Lake Berryessa stabbing, and one person did the Paul Stine murder. This would explain why there are all these differences. This would explain why one time the victims are stabbed, but the other times they are shot. One time why the killer is wearing this hooded costume, and then why the other times this person is not, because different people operated in this way. I really have to backtrack a little bit from that, because in 2019 I was all about that, and in 2020, I guess I was gearing away from that type of thrill kill club theory, but still, I mean, I certainly don't have any evidence to support that. Especially think about what we just said about that 360-degree circle, about how this individual is intentionally trying to recreate behaviors. They could have a certain sense of significance and meaning to a particular person, and that is the largest rebuttal that I would have to any type of multiple killers theory. These signatures that have been attributed to music and literature and mathematics, they seem so personal. They seem like they were created by one person, and how these things line up to radians, and how that there are these clues in the Mikado and T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, and even connections to Herman Melville. All of these things seem like they were created by one person, or it's so personal that it doesn't really require multiple individuals. And I even said that throughout many multiple killers theory discussions. Hey, this is just a maybe. Other people would have would not be required. But to answer the exact question, how many people do you think the Zodiac killer killed? If we have one killer, 5. Any of the unconfirmed incidents have not sold me. I do not feel convinced on any of the other non-canonical crimes that they were actually committed by the Zodiac killer, including Domingos Edwards. If I had to make a decision now, I would say no. I don't believe that is the Zodiac killer, because I'm just not convinced. I don't feel that I have enough evidence. And what I said about Sherry Jo Bates in 1966 was that I went from being 90% certain that she was not murdered by the Zodiac killer to about 60% certain that she was not murdered by the Zodiac killer. I mean, bear in mind, that's just what I think happened. I mean, I wasn't there myself. I can't really say with 100% certainty, but I just wanted to share that because definitely would accept the 5 canonical crimes, and everything else I still say is unconfirmed. What do you think about that, though? That can be another challenge question. How many people do you think were actually murdered by the Zodiac killer? And I'm sure you could tell by talking about Domingos Edwards. I think there's a high possibility that could be Zodiac related, and that is someone who is, as they said, the young, inexperienced Zodiac. Yes, it could be, but well, I think that answers that one, but let's go on to our next question. And it was actually a question that has a question mark at the end, but but it's more of just a statement that says, this is on the Lake Herman Road Murders Q&A session written by Kevin Bowen, who says, teenage potheads stumped the FBI cryptography unit for 60 years, question mark. I'm not quite sure what Kevin is referring to, but I think it's the possibility that Lake Herman Road on December 20th, 1968, when David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen were murdered, was a drug-related crime. And if that were the case, then that would mean that, once again, the Zodiac killer didn't actually commit those murders, but he simply took credit for it. And I'm not really quite sure how you mean that. I definitely wouldn't think that this group of potheads or something, like the people that may have been there to fight David Faraday, would have actually been responsible for the entirety of the Zodiac killer creation. Now, we have our next comment that is going to come into us about the multiple killers theory, and it is from Jamie Hendrickson, who has left 3 excellent comments here that I would actually like to go through. Thank you, Jamie Hendrickson, longtime friend of the show. Jamie Hendrickson says, it seems to me that multiple killers just assumes too much. One killer makes more sense, as the Lake Berryessa killing is the only one with a different MO. The different MO makes sense because you wouldn't want to fire a gun up there, as it would be heard for miles. There were just too few roads in and out of the lake. Being clear, I misread it the first time. There were just too few roads in and out of the lake. If he used a gun, he never would have gotten away. For me, the killings were all pretty consistent. I don't see discrepancies in the witness descriptions of the Zodiac. I pretty much disregard the Stein sketch because those kids couldn't have gotten a good look at his face. Okay, absolutely. Multiple killers and the Zodiac killer mystery is an assumption, unconfirmed. Absolutely it is. I would admit that completely. But the next comment that is left on the same episode, and this is actually on Zodiac Killer, my personal theories, when I did a 25-minute explanation about, okay, this is what I think about the Zodiac Killer. I would invite all of you to listen to that. Jamie Hendrickson's next comment is, I just realized the other day about the Zodiac hoax theory. The caller to the Vallejo Police Department had no more than 30 minutes to learn of the murder and link it to the Lake Herman Road murders. That just isn't plausible. This would, of course, been about after the murder of Darlene Ferrin on the 4th of July, 1969, and really the call was made on the 5th of July at 12:40 a.m. after Darlene Ferrin had been pronounced dead. Now, in regards to this call, if somebody is listening like Thomas Horan or Evan from Texas, who is an expert on the hoax theory, it doesn't actually have to be an active participant in the hoax theory to have made that call. I think that the explanation that has been provided about why some person was writing letters taking credit for murders that he didn't commit, but then there's also these phone calls that have come in, is that those were prank phone calls. And when I first heard Thomas Henry Horn say this in an interview, I was like, what does he mean, a prank phone call? Somebody committed a murder, and then, well, if somebody else called it in, then that would make them an active participant, would it not? But yes, it's the idea of somebody is following along with a police scanner, and then somebody just calls the police, and they've learned the information from the police scanner, and then they just say something like, "I also killed those 2 kids last year. Goodbye," and like meaning that they weren't even necessarily talking about Lake Herman Road. The person who made the prank phone call, I repeat, prank phone call, wasn't actually trying to connect it to Lake Herman Road at all. They might not even have known about Lake Herman Road. Later on, then, somebody who was composing the hoax theory attributed that prank phone call to the Lake Herman Road murders because it was very suitable. It was also a crime that may have been something that was covering up activities of a confidential informant and a drug-related confidential informant. But it's some complicated stuff, and I'm not even sure I understand it completely. But thank you to Jamie Hendrickson for the comments, and if anyone would like to dispute any of those the statements that I made about the hoax theory and the phone calls, please put that in the comments section below. And I said that Jamie Hendrickson had a third comment, and this one's posted on Zodiac Killer Shel Cavalli Part 1, when we were looking at Shel Cavalli as a Zodiac Killer suspect. He is the car import-export guy, he is the individual who was born in Norway, who came to the United States of America and became a very prominent businessman. He is also Micro Deli's major suspect. Jamie Hendrickson writes, reasons why Cavalli is definitely not the Zodiac Killer. Number 1, he is too tall and too thin to fit the descriptions at Blue Rock Springs and Lake Berryessa. Number 2, he voluntarily submitted to a DNA test. The real killer would never have been certain that he left no DNA behind. Number 3, we have absolutely 0 instances of highly successful and prominent citizens who are also serial killers. Number 4, Cavalli lived until 2013, which begs the question, why would he have stopped Zodiac activity in the 1970s? The first one, okay, I follow you there. The second one, I absolutely follow you. He voluntarily submitted to a DNA test. Number 3, we have absolutely 0 instances of highly successful prominent citizens who are also serial killers. Only in fiction, perhaps, maybe in comic books and movies, and yeah. I really want to put some more thought into that. Maybe we can even do like an Anything Goes segment on Friday. Who are these highly prominent citizens who are also serial killers? You do have to put some thought into it, and there must be somebody like a Lex Luthor or the Kingpin or something who is very tyrannical, but even those guys wouldn't be serial killers because they're mostly financially motivated or power motivated. It's not really someone who is acting upon urges that come from bizarre, unhealed traumas in their childhood. That's a good observation, and maybe we can respond to that in the future, but here's one. Number 4, Cavalli lived until 2013, which begs the question of why would he have stopped killing in the 1970s? With the Zodiac Killer mystery, this doesn't have to be exclusive to Shel Cavalli. I'm not even going to really challenge Jamie Hendrickson on that point exclusively to Cavalli. I think it's a good observation. But many people believe that for 1968 and 69, this serial killer attributed the Zodiac persona to that set of murders only, and that this was someone who was changing their MO, committing crimes in a different way. It may have had significance to the killer, but maybe this individual is also just committing the crimes his way to fool the authorities. The idea that there is this serial killer that flew under the radar that didn't get caught because he's committing some murders in this area like Riverside, or then near Santa Barbara like the Gaviota Beach murders that we were just talking about with Domingos and Edwards, then the Swindle murders, and then they're happening in different locations, as well as this person is just moving the crimes to different areas, and in the Bay Area, there are 5 people that are murdered under the name of the Zodiac Killer, and then that's it. The person changed the personality. The persona is different. So then people are always going to say, hey, the Zodiac Killer only murdered 5 people. I just said that earlier. But in reality, this is actually a very prolific serial killer that flew under the radar. I mean, that's possible. I definitely admit it's possible, but I'm still not convinced that the Zodiac murdered anyone outside of the canonical crimes. But what do you think about that? And all right, well, thank you to everyone who has written into the comment section on the Zodiac Killer, and we will be right back after this quick message. Bum ba bum 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 ba bum 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 ba bum bum bum. At this time, I would like to remind everybody about YouTube Premium. If you use the YouTube Premium features, you can download Black Box Online Radio, take it on the go, out walking, in the car, anywhere and anyhow. YouTube Premium also gives you access to special YouTube original shows and YouTube music. And now, let's get back to the episode. Okay, hello everybody, we are back. The next question we have is one that was sent in to the Instagram page, BlackBoxOnlineRadio on Instagram. That's where you can find the bonus podcast that I'm talking about all the time. And this one comes to us from Robbie ZZZ Vita 22. I hope I said that as well as I could. And he says, awesome mate, I love your show. Keep up the fight. Keep fighting the good fight. Cheers from the Gold Coast of Australia. Do you think the Zodiac is still alive? And if so, do you think he will reveal himself before passing on or even be caught finally? Cheers, brother. Okay, so, Robbie, thank you for the comment and question there. Do you think the Zodiac is still alive? Highly improbable. No, very unlikely. No, I don't. Because 50 years since the final canonical crime, it's actually like approaching 52 now, since to the murder of Paul Stein, October 11th, 1969, it's highly unlikely that the perpetrator would still be alive, especially when they're looking at the possibility of having someone late 30s or early 40s who committed the murders. Then that would really suggest that there's a low probability that someone was still alive. I mean, people are living into their hundreds these days. People are always living longer, but in regards to the second part of this here, do you think he will reveal himself before passing on or finally be caught? You would think that somebody would do that, right? Like a deathbed confession, but not only like the Randy Kenny Louis Myers thing that's like a hearsay confession, or someone is just sharing info that they could have learned about from studying the Zodiac Killer mystery. Instead, like someone would reveal something private. Paul Stein's wallet was buried at this location. This is how you solve the Z13 cipher. This is how you solve the Z32, and have physical evidence to back that up. Not only that, but partnering it with DNA, and maybe there are more pieces of Paul Stein's bloody shirt, or some type of hard evidence that is partnered with DNA that could be obtained from the letters. I really think would be how you would be able to get some more solidified answers. But in regards to writing the deathbed confession, I think that with a lot of these serial killers, if it even goes like 50 years, I think that a lot of them would just kind of put it in the past. And I even have to go back to the material that I learned from Lyndon Lafferty, even though I don't always speak super highly of his work. It's just that he was a proponent of the idea that if a serial killer has a long cooling off period, it's highly unlikely that they will kill again, meaning that if they go dormant or their activities stop, if they stop their reign of terror, then it's highly unlikely that they will kill again. And during the Golden State Killer episodes on this channel, we talked about that one a lot, because that, in most instances, that that is because of the decrease in testosterone, as well as old age and predatory instincts. And many people believe that the Zodiac did not commit another crime under the name Zodiac after the murder of Paul Stein, because he thought that, okay, that was way too close a call of getting caught. If I do this again, I'm going to get caught. Alright, I've had my thrill killings. Now we need to focus on writing the letters. Either that or committing the crimes in a more anonymous way, because, as we said about that 360-degree thing, like, many people do believe that the Zodiac killer was someone who just flew under the radar, and he just reported 5 murders under the name Zodiac because it's like committing a little bit of criminal activity here, a little bit of criminal activity there. It's going to confuse the authorities to no end. But the real question is, do you think he will reveal himself before passing on? I'd say it's highly unlikely, because I think that that person has just put that chapter of their life in the past, and they would probably not even care that much. And I mean, we don't necessarily know what this individual would have going on, or if it's some type of group, then it would be very difficult to prove. Like if somebody committed one of the murders, why would they make themselves known as the Zodiac Killer if they did not do that? I mean, is this just an egocentric move? Perhaps, but 50 years later, people, I guess I'm trying to say, serial killers tend to move on from those times. I'm sure they have memories of it that are very vivid, but they don't want to bring that back into their daily life. But perhaps we'll say more about that on the Anything Goes segment on Friday. But I do appreciate this, and this is once again a comment from BlackBoxOnlineRadio on Instagram. That's where this one was left. Thank you, Robbie. Okay, and our next one was sent in to the email address, actually, blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And this is another one from Playtime, but anybody can write the show at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And it's a way you can send longer messages, it's a way you can share documents, and just to ask your questions for the AMA, just in other ways. We have the comment section here on YouTube, BlackBoxNet88 on Instagram, and the in the email address, blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And Playtime says, one actually about the JonBenet Ramsey case. Genius, Ned. Again, I was erased, but I got wise. I copied it first. So it's another useful function of having this email now. The YouTube police have an issue with this document that relates to real crime, who killed the pageant queen. Actually, it's documentary, excuse me, I misread that. Your audience should check it out. It has been trashed many times by the Boulder cops. That's how you know it's right. There was a botched kidnapping in the JonBenet Ramsey case. Boulder cops blew the investigation. Check out ReTV, that's spelled ReeTV, ReTV. She makes some good points. DNA proves it was not a Ramsey, and Boulder cops sat on the DNA from the beginning. Now they're lying and saying that the DNA could have come from the underwear of a factory worker. These cops are some deviant suckers. The DNA was from a white male, but not John Ramsey. How could a white male go to Asia, get a job in 2 separate factories that only hire Asian females? Okay. Then on top of that, leave DNA under his fingernails to match on separate undergarments. Remember, there are 2 sides. Pick one and forget about whatever the other side says. Otherwise, they can continue to play with your mind. Boulder cops are dishonest brokers. They move the goalpost from one Ramsey to the next when you prove them wrong. The kidnappers were probably experienced enough with the terror or rush of adrenaline that provides when a person is performing a life-altering act. I've had many experiences with adrenaline. You experience the fight or flight syndrome when you are psychologically traumatized, as Patsy was, but the kidnappers did not consider what effect it would have on inexperienced victims. Criminals that point a gun at the victim in a robbery are often shocked as the gun is grabbed away from them, or that the victim unexpectedly fights back. They don't expect the fear response. Confucius' kung fu proverb, the offensive die, while the defensive merely survive. Nature has made a kung fu master with the natural drug that provides, and that's natural drug is talking about adrenaline, the protection you need when you are attacked. With the note, I think it was possibly dictated to the housekeeper by her drunk-ass husband, and, well, I guess it explains more in the next line here. The ransom notepad was taken home for practice by Hoffman Pugh. That's Linda Hoffman Pugh. It was found in her garage. It promised if you call the cops, we'll kill her, but the adrenaline clouded Ramsey's thinking and made their actions seem crazy. They barely started reading the note when the fear became too much and they called the cops. If only they had finished reading the note and calling, JonBenet Ramsey might still be alive. As Patsy screaming panicked the kidnappers who were listening in, JonBenet was immediately murdered. And yes, that is the way it's written. Now, you might be thinking a lot of things about the murder of JonBenet Ramsey back in 1966 already. I mean, Playtime is laying out a very large theory here. The only other point that I would say about how this ransom note was dictated to Linda Hoffman Pugh by her drunk-ass husband. His name is Merv Pugh. Uh, I mean, that's his name. I was going to say something that was less flattering, but I won't. Okay, so when you read the ransom note, it definitely feels like the words of a woman. Like those people who would say that the ransom note in the JonBenet case were using a note that was written by a woman, but the words of a man. Written by a woman, but the words of a man. Like, it definitely feels like a man would have written this. If I had been reading this on a typewriter, and I did, like if you go back to our episode on the book Perfect Murder, Perfect Town by Lawrence Schiller, I'll read off the whole thing, and I was like, this sounds so masculine. But when you look at the paper ransom note that this was written on, it sounds feminine. So, I mean, perhaps Playtime and I were in somewhat of an agreement that it was probably dictated to a woman, like a man is telling a woman what to write in the note. And this, I mean, it really just doesn't have a single feminine characteristic. But does that mean that Linda Hoffman Pugh wrote it? Not necessarily. Does that mean that Merv Hoffman Pugh was the person who came up with the ideas? I mean, based on that alone, that certainly isn't proof. Many people think that Patsy Ramsey wrote the ransom note and John Ramsey was dictating it to her, but once again, that's just speculation in both directions. In the past, I have been much more convinced that JonBenet was murdered by an intruder, but somebody like Linda Hoffman Pugh was the housekeeper, and I'm not saying that she murdered JonBenet, not accusing her, but in the past, I definitely thought that way, because I was like, I just did not believe that one of the Ramseys did it for the sole fact that there was the vomit at the crime scene where someone's high-tech boot print was stepped in, and they were able to locate those boots. Later on, they belonged to an individual named Michael Helgoth, who went on to commit suicide, and he was the junkyard owner who lived on the outskirts of Boulder. That really told me that it was an associate of Michael Helgoth that would have been involved with this, and people to this day are still trying to establish a link between Linda Hoffman Pugh and Michael Helgoth, but I was also heavily persuaded by the book Little Girl Blue by Sweetie B, as well as the documentary Why the Case Will Never Be Solved, which is based on Sweetie B's material. Just recommending it one more time, but now I have definitely taken a step back because of the, I guess people have brought some other things to my attention about John Ramsey and about Patsy Ramsey, and the famous thing that they say about Linda Arndt, the first police officer that was on site at the JonBenet crime scene. Linda Arndt, you may remember her from the famous interviews that she did. She said that she almost certainly knew who killed JonBenet, and everybody's like saying she thinks it's John Ramsey. I haven't heard that from her words directly, but everybody on the internet is just simply putting out, oh, she knows what she's about to say. It's John Ramsey. A lot of people are looking to the Ramseys for for reasons, because the items that were used in the crime scene were all from their house. The notepad, the marker, the paintbrush. I mean, they like, and also the things that they get into on the Stones Unturned podcast are more about how a lot of the counter evidence that is put against the Ramseys could actually have just been deception. Like the whole thing about JonBenet didn't wet the bed on the night that she was murdered. Well, maybe they simply just changed the bed sheets if they had more hours. I mean, if this was the family, then they would have had much more time to have done something. And because of the date on JonBenet's tombstone that she was murdered on December 25th, or her date of death on her tombstone says December 25th, but she would have almost certainly have been murdered on December 26th, and John Ramsey's explanation for that was that, well, she left us on Christmas Day, they put her to bed on Christmas night, that was the last day that she was with us, but some people think that that's a clue saying that she was actually murdered perhaps around 11 p.m. or something on Christmas Day by one of her family members, but once again, that's mostly speculation. And just to finish off Playtime's email here, the killers ran away down the alley behind the house Gary Olivia lived in, the halfway house literally 2 blocks away, the alley which he walked every day, and he said that he would watch JonBenet on her bike, though her skull was cracked like Helgoth said. The body lived on for some time, causing the actual death of the detached body to come from the garrote. Rigor mortis then sets in some 3 hours later, depending on environmental factors. In the Marines, I was tasked with putting bodies in bags after an attack at our base. I'll never forget the bodies with their arms stiff and reaching up a few hours later made me feel like they were still alive. Very strange. Semper Fi. Hey, Playtime, thank you for your service. Much appreciated. And also, it is really good to get some emails at BlackBoxOnlineRadio at AOL.com. People can share their ideas with the show that way, and please feel free to write. Our next comment comes to us from Tyler Grover, who says, "My thoughts on the Domingos Edwards murders. Someone was familiar with the young couple and the school, angry with one of them for whatever reason, not Zodiac activity. When I first read up on the stuff, Tyler, I was in complete agreement with you. I was like, okay, this is somebody who knew about the activities on June 4th of 1963. This person knew that it was a senior skip day. This person probably knew that Linda Edwards and Robert Domingos were going to a beach and that they were going to be by themselves. And they went there and they attacked one of them. Maybe they were after Linda Edwards because they had an infatuation with her. Maybe they were after Robert Domingos because they wanted to get revenge on him for something. But I was definitely going down that possibility trail, just like the way you laid out, except for the fact that what NPC Porky wrote in about how somebody could have seen the car that was parked by the, I guess you would say, like, well, not exactly a stairway, but the way that you would get down to the beach, and they realized that someone is most likely going to be there alone. I mean, is this person actually targeting, like, a young man and a young woman? There'd be no possible way to know that just by looking at the car, but, I mean, someone could have recognized that someone was going to be in a vulnerable position, so they just parked their car behind it. An opportunistic serial killer that is, who hasn't pre-chosen the victims. And in the episode that we did on the Domingos Edwards murders, very clearly, it's just laid out. Sometimes people want to commit a murder, but the victims are not chosen ahead of time. They have definitely done all the plotting and planning. They're just waiting for the opportunistic moment to find somebody in a vulnerable situation. The next thing to say about that is there could have also been the person living in that shack that was at the beach and where the bodies were originally found. And this person decided to murder them for whatever reason. But this is my first instinct. Absolutely, I was on the same page with you. Our next question comes to us from Midnight Story Productions, and to provide a little bit of context, somebody asked me the question last week on the AMA, why the hate for Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, the serial killer? And Midnight Story Productions has replied to that question by saying, why all the hate for Richard Ramirez? What kind of question is that? He was a completely, utterly, and ruthless killer. The man hanged a young girl. She wasn't even a teenager. I think she was a victim under the age of 10. What a dumb question. This man was an animal in his purest form, a bad animal. And my simple response last week was, Richard Ramirez was the serial killer known as the Night Stalker, but the reason why I've never done an episode on him in its entirety is because he was just a jerk that got out of control. He was a rude, nasty, pathetic individual who just became more and more extreme and intense. And with most serial killer cases, you really want to try and find out where was the moment in this individual's life in which he was traumatized or she was traumatized, and how did these traumatic elements create this destructive individual? Because you want to know what are these bad things in life, and you actually want to find out how it happens. With Richard Ramirez, I can tell you how it happened. He was a jerk, and his levels of jerkassery just got more and more intense. But I want to be also clear about something that I said during last week's AMA, why the hate for Richard Ramirez. I do not hate him. I don't hate anyone. I dislike him. I absolutely do not like any of these serial killers because of what they do. And it's back to that quote from the movie The Gray Man, which talks about the serial killer Albert Fish. At a certain point, you have to look at who someone is and not what happened to them. Actually, I think I jumbled that quote a little bit. The quote is that you have to stop looking at what happened to someone and look at who they are. See, that sounds so much better that way. Do you ever have those experiences like when you're watching a movie and then there's just like one quotation, like it's just a sentence more or less, or maybe two sentences, and then you're like, oh, wow, now I have this greater understanding of humanity. That was for me watching the movie The Gray Man last year, and there are two episodes on the serial killer Albert Fish here on this channel, and I also use that material when I did the one on the execution of Lamarcus Davidson, which a lot of people have been tuning into and leaving lots of comments. I mean, I'm getting comments on that, every single week it's just, I think I've said everything I have to say about the Knoxville Nightmare, and Lamarcus Davidson was the ringleader in the murders of Channing Christian and Christopher Newsom. But in regards to Richard Ramirez, not only did he hang this young child, he also sexually assaulted several victims, and he is an absolutely disgusting individual, and the only person that kind of comes to mind who I would put in this similar category is Richard Speck, and I was reading up on him a little bit. Richard Speck was the individual who murdered 8 student nurses. I saw like a couple documentaries about him way back in the day, one when I was a kid, and then some more in my early 20s, and they even had, the last time I heard about him was when they released the Richard Speck tapes, and they found like a video confession that he had done when he was in prison. But he was also just a really rude, nasty, mean individual, and his actions got out of control. So that's all there really is to say. But I mean, I'm kind of in agreement. Just maybe my language isn't as harsh as Midnight Story Productions, but yeah, absolutely. I mean, Richard Ramirez, Richard Speck, these guys are disgusting individuals. And right now, Kelly Gable left in some comments that are about the Zodiac Killer, about the serial killer Kenneth Harrison, as well as the Domingos Edwards murders. And what I would want to note is that if we look at the serial killer Kenneth Harrison, he was known as the Giggler. After he murdered one individual, he called in and he said that there's a body down in the water. This is the Giggler, and he busted out into maniacal laughter. In regards to having any connection to the Zodiac Killer mystery, there is an incident that took place in June of 1963, prior to the Domingos Edwards murders, right? That's the murder of Vernon C. Smith, which I hope to do a larger episode on in the future. And you do not have this type of description in the Zodiac witness descriptions, not at Blue Rock Springs, not at Lake Berryessa, where they say that this individual, Sandy, murdered Vernon Smith and then just busted out into laughter while he was doing it. Well, where are those descriptions in the Zodiac Killer mystery? And I really want to expand upon this because I think there's a lot more to say, but I mean, I think that's a whole episode in its own right. But I just don't necessarily see a connection with this laughing maniacal maniac unless we are indeed dealing with a paranoid schizophrenic. And I'll just read off one of Kelly's comments. The more I look into the Lake Berryessa attack, I notice the similarities to the Giggler. I now believe with all my heart that the Giggler, Kenneth Harrison, is the man under the mask and robe who tied up and stabbed Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard. Well, the call that the Giggler made was on June 15th or 16th of 1969, and this was when he murdered the individual Joe Breen outside of a bar. In short, they got into a dispute over a bottle of whiskey, and Kenneth Harrison was someone who would just get overtaken with murderous impulses, like even to the point when he was like helping an elderly woman walk across a bridge, and her name was Clover Parker, and he just threw her over the bridge rail, just like in a murderous impulse. And another one of Kenneth Harrison's victims was Lucy Palmerine, like a girl he convinced to let him give her a piggyback ride, and then he was just, once again, the murderous impulse just came on at the sight. I would challenge you actually on this one by saying the Lake Berryessa attack was purely calculated because the costume, because of the pre-cut lengths of rope, and the person has to walk 300 meters to get to the picnic site where Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard are. I think that's quite different than an extremely impulsive murderer, but I mean, I do notice these similarities. I mean, both the Giggler and the Zodiac made the phone calls after the crimes, as well as the infrequency of the murders. I believe Kenneth Harrison was charged with 4 murders, and they definitely weren't happening every single weekend. Very large intervals. His first murder's in 1967, and the last one was in the late fall of 1969. It's definitely in the late fall thereabouts, and that was when he murdered a schoolboy, and then the body was not even thrown into water that time, but hidden under a piece of canvas in the subway tunnels. But I think that's where we would have to leave it at that for now. But I have one last one to say that comes to us from Playtime, and this was actually a comment that was deleted once again, but I was able to save some of it, and this is from Playtime that says, very interesting about the Empire of Venice and the theory of the Black Venetians. the idea that there is this empire of economic and financial control, which most people think of as the New World Order. But Playtime's comment is, the Rothschilds, also pronounced Rothschilds, the Illuminati, Bilderbergs, banksters, the Third Reich, WTO, the Fed, the global elite, the oligarchs, these are all ways of saying the same thing. I was able to save some of that comment, but yes, I'm not the one deleting these things. YouTube is really trying to censor something. And I also have one here from Andrew WVA who wanted to make the announcement that, Ned, I wanted to let your subscribers know that the ebooks of Michael Cole's Zodiac Revisited series are deeply discounted now, but will end soon. Okay, Andrew, thank you for that announcement there. And if anybody would like to read Zodiac Revisited by Michael Cole, there are 3 books in the series, and you can hear about it on this channel, but I would invite all of you to read the books for yourselves. And no, it's true. There's definitely been a major price cut. After I read that comment, I went back and looked on Amazon, and that is correct. And the last one is a question. Nid, any thoughts on the Nick Hillary case? There's a good documentary about it on HBO, I think. I have never heard of this one, but I will add this to the list of possible topics. Nick Hillary, I'm not even sure who that is, but I will look into that one, and thank you so much for that one there. Maybe we can do an episode on that in the future, and at this time I would just turn things over to you guys and say, please share some more thanks in the comments section. BlackBoxNet88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast, BlackBoxOnlineRadio at AOL.com. Please reach out in any way that you would like, and I will see you there for the bonus podcast indeed. Until next time.